Greetings, my fellow evolved mammals, and welcome to the second episode of my Counter-Apologetics series. I'm Shane the Skeptic, and today I'm going to talk about suffering and the disturbing outlook that the Christian faith has on it by reviewing a sermon by Jeff Durbin from Apologia Studios called Suffering Well. Before addressing the sermon, as an atheist, I think it's important to establish that I don't believe that the argument known as the problem of evil or the problem of suffering disproves theism. What I intend to do in this video is point out the logical inconsistencies of a worldview which claims that suffering, something that everyone experiences as bad, is required by an omnibenevolent, in other words, all-good, God, who also happens to be omnipotent, in other words, all-powerful and having the ability to do anything. I would discourage any non-believer who takes the time to argue with apologists from ever suggesting that the existence of suffering, evil, or anything unpleasant proves or even suggests that the universe must not have been designed by an intelligent being. With that established, allow me to address the sermon.
You know today, of course, the title of the sermon is Suffering Well. Suffering Well. Such an important, fundamental, important grounding that's necessary for the believer in Jesus Christ. If you know God, if you are reconciled to God, if you have peace with God, this is one of those pillars that you need to get right before God and in your life.
It seems apparent that what he's saying is that there's a correct way as well as an incorrect way to suffer for the sake of God. And it's fundamentally important that you don't have the incorrect outlook on suffering before you face God. As in, before your judgment, before God decides whether to grant you eternal pleasure or eternal torture and fire. From a non-Christian perspective, this sounds outright abusive and mildly concerning to hear a person say that they think. But to the ears of a Christian, this sounds completely rational and likely doesn't sound like a concerning idea in the slightest. To explain my concern, what I'm hearing Jeff Durbin advocate for is a God who's not only going to cause you to suffer, but is going to judge you and determine whether or not your fate shall be eternal torture based on your feelings and outlook on the suffering that he puts you through. In other words, Jeff has an abuser who deliberately causes harm to him, and if Jeff doesn't learn how to love his abuser throughout the harmful actions, he's going to be worse than beaten literally forever. But remember, this is a relationship that Jeff is advocating for you to also be in, obviously in the same position that he's in as the abused rather than the abuser.
We can have peace with God. We can be reconciled to God. We can know Jesus. We can not be condemned. But we live in a fallen world where there is difficulty. There is still death. There is sickness. There is disease. There is slander, there is gossip, there is backbiting, there is loss, there is hostility left remaining in this world, and we will face it if we are in this world. But it hasn't lost the grip of God, all of the suffering, all of the trials, and so to that we go today. Suffering well.
Interesting. Even if you're as good of a Christian as you know how to be, the Christian God still won't protect you from suffering. And even if you're someone who has a relationship with Jesus, you're still susceptible to disease, slander, and hostility, plenty of which are left in this world which was supposedly created by the God that we're speaking of. And at the end, Jeff even says that all this suffering hasn't left the grip of God. So God remains in control of this universe, literally every detail of it, but he won't abolish or even minimize the suffering of those who willingly dedicate their existence to worshiping him. Think about what it means to be good, as in moral or ethical. Imagine if you had the ability to end the suffering of just one terminally ill person if you dedicated an hour of your time and effort to doing so. Wouldn't you, in this circumstance, do everything you were capable of to save this person? If not, imagine this is somebody that you know and care about, and this takes minimal effort for you to pull off. Wouldn't you look at the person who was in this position and chose not to help as obesely immoral and perhaps even inhumane? If you answered yes, just consider the ease of which a being with the ability to do anything could accomplish this for not just one person or a million people, but rather every terminally ill person on the planet. Then consider that if this being exists, it watches children suffer from cancer, malaria, and other diseases that this God-given planet has to offer, and it still hasn't done this.
And then into Romans 8, where the Apostle Paul breaks out into this epic moments, talking about ultimately the sovereignty of God. Isn't it interesting? It all leads to that. Here's your condition. Here's who God is. Here's who Jesus is. This is what God did. And it moves into now God's sovereignty. He's in control of all this. He was the one who initiated it. He controls it. He is the central reference point of it all.
Even though this does nothing but continue on to my previous point, we need to remember that when Jeff says that God's in control of the universe, he uses language like God's in control of all of this, meaning we don't get to pick and choose which parts of the universe God is in control of. We cannot say that God is in control and responsible for the person who decided to pull over to save you from a car wreck, while also insisting that God is not in control or responsible for the person who decided to drive drunk, causing them to swerve into your car and injure you.
That's where his whole story moves towards. It goes to the sovereignty of God. God's the sovereign. He deserves all the glory for this. He's done it all himself. He's the one that holds it all together. And what does that mean? It means even in your sufferings, God is the sovereign.
Yes, God is the one who should be credited with your relatives' drug addictions. It also follows that we should credit God with every rape, murder, theft, and lie that has ever happened. If you're a Christian watching this, can you at least see now why someone who doesn't hold a belief in your religion may find your religion to be incredibly disturbing and inhumane? I ask you, if you're that person watching this video who holds a belief in this religion, how would you judge the character of anyone that you know if you found out that they deliberately caused the suffering of others on a regular basis? Or even if they simply had the ability to prevent the suffering of others and just opted not to? How would you judge the person who didn't drug anyone, didn't kidnap anyone, didn't restrain anyone, didn't rape anyone, didn't kill anyone, but hung out with someone while they did all of these things to a helpless child and opted not to stop them even while being fully capable of doing so? If you agree with me that a person choosing not to help the child while being capable is morally wrong, then you must explain to me why it would not be at least equally as wrong for God to have watched every time something like this has ever happened to a child and done nothing, when it would have been not only possible, but actually easy to do so.
And so Romans chapter 8, hear now the words of the living and the true God. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God.
So you can accept every horrible thing that God ever puts you through because He promises that one day He'll do something to make up for it.
For those who love God, all things work together for good.
So literally every lie, theft, rape, murder, sex trafficking, disease, famine, hurricane, tornado, genocide, everything alike, it's all good in a way that we just can't tell. But one day we'll get to meet the guy who predestined all of this, and when we do, we'll understand why it was actually all so good. I'm sorry, my Christian viewers, but you cannot expect to be taken morally seriously when you advocate for this way of thinking. The rest of the sermon continues on to the points that have already been made within the clips that I've shown you in this video. So, to summarize the point that I'm making, I'm going to put it in deductive form. A being which is omnibenevolent is all good and by definition cannot have any imperfection or form of badness. A being which is omnipotent is all powerful and has the ability to do anything, making it impossible by definition for it to be unable to do anything. It logically follows that if this being existed, it would have the ability to make anything not good cease to exist and would only want things which are good to exist, rendering it incompatible with any reality in which anything bad exists. The reality which we live in involves suffering, which is bad. Therefore, a being which is both omnibenevolent and omnipotent cannot exist in this reality. As frustrating as it is to watch this man preach his harmful ideas, and as painful as it is to watch him preach hateful ideas about LGBT people and atheists, I cannot but look at him and feel sympathetic when I consider that he, as a grown man much older than myself, has to live with this belief and this outlook on life and already has for the majority of his. If you're a Christian and you've actually told your child that they're a dirty sinner and they deserve to suffer, then I think you should be ashamed of yourself. But if you're a Christian who maybe hasn't considered that the ideas being described in this video and throughout this sermon are in fact the ideas that the religion of Christianity teaches, then I want to kindly ask you to consider whether or not this is a belief system that genuinely suits your moral judgment. Remember that Jeff Durbin is not an idiot, as his wisdom on biblical mythology is in fact a form of wisdom, though it is dangerously misled. Jeff Durbin doesn't appear to be someone who just doesn't understand the Bible or hasn't spent enough time studying it. I believe that what Jeff Durbin is advocating for are ideas that are actually completely consistent with the Bible. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe to me on YouTube, and don't forget to like my page on Facebook. And as always, stay safe and don't forget to wash your hands.